Hey guys, so today we're going to be discussing the differences between DSLRs and cell phone cameras. Now, diving into this topic a little bit, so one of those big similarities is what is the price of these things? So price point, if you're getting into photography at all, the camera that's in your pocket is just the same price as a camera that's out of the store. The only difference is you make phone calls on this. I'm a big fan of use what you have first. Once you understand how to use something, then getting one of the big boy cameras, getting one of these big DSLRs and learning about the process of that. These things happen over time. That you learn how to use something the more that you have access to it. So learning how to use your cell phone first and get good photography out of your cell phone is kind of an essential thing before you start moving up to one of these cameras. Don't just go out there and buy one of these things if you don't know how to take a picture first. All right, now dealing with photography, there are a variety of standards that we can tie in with photography, be it that I'm going to be using the visual art standards. Now I know under visual arts we don't have master standards from the national level as to what we need to cover in photography. However, we are going to be covering some basic elements and principles. Line, texture, color, emphasis, which I've said several times, proportion, balance, rhythm, and values, because we're going to have to get into the contrast and how these things are balanced together. So variety too, I guess, that also comes into play. There's a number of different elements and principles that you're going to use. Find the ones that fit to the project that you're working on, by all means. However, there are other standards out there. So one of those main components of when you're taking a shot is, what do we want to see in focus? What is our emphasis of our creation? What is the emphasis of this portrait? What is the emphasis of the landscape? What is the emphasis of the picture in general? Emphasis is one of those basic elements of art words. Emphasis is a principle of art. Now, principles and elements build up our artwork and our art world as the basic building blocks of what we're trying to create. Picking an emphasis, picking something that you want to emphasize. What do you want the audience to resonate with? What is the reason why they should have any interest in your work at all? They're trying to find something that they can have a connection with inside of the piece. That's your emphasis. Now, one of those key components, don't just point and click. You're just wasting shots, that you're wasting light, you're wasting time, you're wasting resources. That's an imperative thing to learn first. So, shooting with a camera phone, I have an Apple phone. It's kind of funny because I'm a big tech guy and I'm very anti-Apple in general. Now, the culture that we live in that moment. We want to get that moment as fast as possible. Here's the thing. Don't just pull out your phone, pull up the camera app and click just like this. Number one, you're at an angle. That bothers me to no end. Seeing some of my students work where they'll come in, they'll show me a picture that they took. It's on that angle. Take time. If you're going to do a portrait mode, perfectly up and down. However, 9 times out of 10, I highly recommend that my students shoot in landscape mode. Landscape mode gives you a lot more to work with. Seeing it on the side like this, it gives you much more real estate on that shot. Your photograph is going to be a nice rectangular shape. That's going to give you a lot more to work with later on down the road when we're going to get into editing. Now, if it is a portrait, one of those things about portraits are, on the vertical shot like this, that's perfectly natural. That's a normal looking photograph. One thing that you'll notice as I'm going back and forth, I'm holding the phone with both hands. I'm not just sitting there. I'm not doing one of those shots. The reason I'm not doing those kinds of shots are because I want to ensure that the stability of my photograph, everything's in focus, nothing's kind of blurry. I want to make sure it's as crisp as possible. Now, you can change and you can add blur later on down the road, but when you're doing the first initial shot, try and make it as crisp as possible. So, number one, when you're holding the camera, not doing the point and click, you're setting up your shot. Look at your screen. Look at the subject. How much difference in relation are you into that subject scene? When I'm taking the photograph on here, I'm angling not just the way that the camera is vertically, I'm also taking the pitch. I'm changing how it's structured up or down. This is going to change how much light is going onto the face or how much light is going onto the scene, or if I want to have shadows in a different angle, that's going to kind of change a little bit of that. When I'm shooting on a landscape mode, I'm usually wanting to go a little lower. And by getting a little lower, you get a little more sky in the image and you have that horizon line at a different thing. So horizon line, dealing with horizon line, you're dealing with where the sky touches the ground. Now that nice line is going to have to change where it sits in that image, because Changing the line inside of that image is going to give us more information. Do we want to focus on the sky? Or do we want to focus on the ground, the subject matter that we're trying to pick up? Now, when you're shooting those landscapes, shooting those portraits, the emphasis has to be predominant, has to be at the forefront of the overall image. Does that mean it has to be the thing that's closest to you? By all means, no. It can be the thing that's furthest back away that you want to have everybody drawn into and get that substance out of what you're trying to illustrate, what you're trying to photograph. Sometimes you have to give your audience a way to get there though. So sometimes you have to think about the path of the photograph and how you're going to use line to help showcase what emphasis you're creating in that image. One of the things that will change this up most is the focus. Are you putting yourself into focus? When you're taking a shot, we have to focus these cameras as well as these cameras. You just have to do two different methods. If you're focusing a cell phone shot, on the screen itself, you're gonna have that, you're gonna tap the screen once, you're gonna see that little yellow box, depending on what kind of model you have, might be yellow, might be white. That's the focus, where you're selecting the focus in the overall image. One tap to select focus. Sometimes a double tap will lock the focus, so if you're shooting something several times, that focus stays in the same spot. So if you have one person who's right here, you're gonna move them over here, they'll be out of focus, so whatever's in that space will be in focus. That's what that means. When you're dealing with a digital camera like this, halfway down on the shutter button, it's gonna lock the focus in whatever aperture, wherever zone you've clicked on, and that's gonna create that toot. When it creates that sound, depending on if you have the sound on, I've turned mine off, that's going to hold lock focus, and then you can go ahead and press the shutter fully down. This is important for us in doing photography because I can lock my focus in on one subject, move the camera a little bit, and then still have that focus at the same point without it changing that focus range. But locking your focus in is imperative to making sure that that nice, clean, crisp shot is of your subject matter. Take a lot of pictures. Take a lot of pictures. Reason I say that is because one of the big things about when you're learning photography or you're teaching photography, don't underestimate how many times you actually need to take a shot of something. Now being in the digital age, we can delete whatever shots we don't like, whatever shots came out bad, we can go ahead and delete those, that's fine. Back in the old film days, we couldn't do that. So on a film strip, you only had X amount of shots, usually between 24 and 36. If you know that you needed to take 20 shots of something and you only had 4 shots that might not work, you took a little more time to ensure that your focus was right, your settings were right, that the light was just right. You had a lot more writing on how many shots you took because you need to make sure that every shot counted. Now, we're a little more loose with this. We can take a dozen shots, and if we don't like them, all but one of them, we can just delete them and we don't have to deal with that one. It's great, love it. Downside is we forgot some of the finer details of how to take an actual shot. Same thing with cell phone photography. You have a ton of photos on here, you've taken a ton of shots, or you're in that moment, you want to just take that one quick pic and move on. Sometimes you need to wait a second, take 2 or 3 pics so that you can analyze and figure out what shot came out the best. Don't be afraid to take extra shots because you can always delete them later. But in the same token, think about what you're shooting. Take that second to think, is this going to be a good shot, or am I just going to need to do this again in 30 seconds later? Now, with my students as well as with my teachers, I tell them minimum when you're doing a shot sequence and you need at least 5 good shots, I expect to see 50 shots that you're going to go and analyze through, what you're going to edit from. Picking 5 shots out of 50 is a lot more to work with than only having 10 shots, and 5 of those better be great, because that only gives you a 50% possibility, whereas the other possibility, you only have to pull 10% of the good shots out of the batch that you took. A lot more flexibility there. Hey class, I hope that you enjoyed this this little dive into photography. I'm gonna be doing a few more videos on this. Be sure to put something down in the comments for me and tell me what questions you guys have about photography. I'm always interested to hear from my students and figure out what you guys want to learn. Happy to teach you guys as always. Let's go over our homework stuff as always. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share. I'll put it out on the various platforms. Always try and get the message out there to all other classmates that might be interested in stuff like this. Take a time out of your day, go take some shots of something. I want you to use some of these tips, these techniques into what you're using. And as always, I will see you guys next class. Later, guys.